learned about English gardens. So it harkens back to the late 80s, this trip and wanting to see all the gardens that they told me about. And from what I learned in their garden, a little English garden, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute. An English garden in the Central Valley of California, which is sometimes a hard row to hoe to row. Anyway, thank you all for being here. It's really fun to see some folks from Filoli and from Public Gardens in the Bay Area, and you Western Hort folks being here. I really appreciate it. So let me get rolling here. The title of my talk is. Can we get the lights, Mary Beth? Thank you. A garden lover's tour of English gardens and the many lessons learned. So a little bit of an outline on what I'm going to cover, how it all happened, some statistics, some logistics, some of the people that I met. I'm going to go list all the gardens and then take you through all the gardens that I visited very quickly. And then talk to you about some of the lessons that I learned on the trip. Some of the garden styles, habitat garden, meadows, winter gardens, climate change, conversations and posters and things that I saw at gardens, donation vegetable stands, new and unexpected plants, laurel lawns, lawn games, silent spaces, special moments. There we go. A little bit about history, containers, some other special moments, garden access, and then a little bit about people in England and how they really love their gardens. Bottom 5, top 10 gardens, and then some tour packages for you if you decide to take a journey. Okay, so how it all started, and it starts with Jerry and Richard, who I just mentioned. Like I just said, I worked for them in the late 80s, and they aspired to have an English garden in Davis, and it's where I first really, going to school in Davis and working at the Arboretum really didn't give me that opportunity to do much in terms of English gardening and working in a landscape that was inspired by English gardens. So that's where I really started first working with hedges and roses and a wide diversity of plants. So I really thank them for starting me on the journey that has led to this adventure that I'm about to describe. Also, in 2019, Filoli did a travel trip to England and visited about a dozen gardens in May of that year, including the Chelsea Flower Show, which you have to go to if you can at some point. Get to the Chelsea Flower Show, and then here's the group of us at Stourhead, and then this new garden that was up at the top of this many story building in London. But those gardens were kind of the foundation of my planning for this trip. So how it all happened, being at Filoli over 20 years, I was eligible to take a sabbatical. And then I started planning in early 2023, keeping notes from books that I looked at, magazine articles on English gardens, TV programs, and then also some recommendations from some folks from England, Troy Scott Smith at Sissinghurst, Claire Margetts, who was a scholar who was at Sissinghurst for a little while, and then also Bill Thomas at Chanticleer. And then I created this Google map. This was my husband Joe's recommendation of mapping all the gardens that I had on my list to figure out where I would be staying and then have access. So this was one of my hubs here in the Oxford area. And so all the pink gardens were the ones that I was going to try to visit in that area. And then down in the southwest I stayed in Exeter. I'll talk a little bit more of that in a minute. And those were the gardens in the southwest. Orange was kind of south central England. And so on. And then as a professional garden person, I had access to the Chanticleer Scholarship. And the Chanticleer Scholarship offers garden professionals the financial support for academic training, school accreditations, or trips like mine. And so I put together my plan, my program plan, a budget, a letter of support from my institution, and was awarded the Chanticleer Scholarship, which covered all my expenses for this trip. Plane ride, Airbnbs, car, gas, food, the whole lot, which was really, really incredible. And so then at the end of my trip, I sent my report to Chanticleer with how my budget stood and everything that I did. And then the last step will be this May, I'll go to Chanticleer and stay there for a week, present this presentation to them, and then also get to work in the garden with the staff there and visit some of the other Philadelphia gardens. So I'm really looking forward to that. Continuing on my my program. So before I left, well, midway, I kind of scheduled about 70% of the gardens that I wanted to see. I reached out to about 12 gardens, purchased a Royal Oak membership, which gets you access to all the UK National Trust gardens, and also an RHS membership, Royal Horticultural Society. I fine-tuned my program in August, just before I left, and then once I left, was constantly refining where I was going to go each day. And I'll show you one of my maps of my travel on one of those days. And then each night I would come home and I would do an Instagram post, and that's my handle, for each garden that I went to. And for a couple, I did 2 posts. And then write notes from each garden. And so this is one of my notebooks and my notes from Stourhead. And then research the gardens that I was going to the next day. So it really was a sabbatical, but it wasn't a vacation. It was a lot of work, but well worth it. So some of the statistics on my trip: I visited 63 gardens in 30 days, 28 of their National Trust sites. Many of them are kind of the big names that you would know. 5 botanical gardens. I drove 3,000 miles, walked 195 miles. Took 8,100 photos, stayed in 4 Airbnbs and 2 gardens, and listened to a bunch of audiobooks, including A Garden Against Time by Olivia Liang, which is a really good garden about her. Grace is raising her hands. It's a really good book about her bringing a garden back and the history of the man who built it, whose name I'm forgetting, and just a beautiful story about reviving a garden and really celebrating everything that was within that garden. So this is my little car that I picked up at Heathrow after an overnight flight to London, terrified about the idea of having to drive on the left side of the road, and having jet lag, and having to go 3 hours to my first accommodation. But it all worked out fine. This shows my planning each night about how I was going to see all the gardens. This is the one day that I did 4 gardens. So I would map out how long it would take to go to each garden and the time in between, and then figure out, usually I would try to go to the farthest one and then come back toward home. So my last leg was a short one, but this was a very ambitious day, but it was a great day. Got to see some really good gardens. These are my accommodations. In Devon, the Devon area near Exeter, near Oxford. I got to stay a night at Hidcote, and then over in Suffolk, to the northeast of London, part of a week at Sissinghurst, and then my last few days were at a country house in Woking, which is just southeast of London. And then some pictures of some of those places. So that's kind of in that order. So Devon, Oxford, Suffolk. Here I am. This was my room at the house at Hidcote. This is my bedroom at Sissinghurst, and then my little cottage in Surrey. Before I left, to all the 12 head gardeners or staff curators at gardens, I sent them a list of questions just to have some things to talk about, and for them to preview before I got there. So I was really interested in how they set up their team, how they get the work done, how they inspire their staff, and then a little bit about professional development, but then also a little bit about climate change and how their garden is addressing it and adapting to it. So it wasn't a very formal interview at each place I went to, and most of them kind of touched on all these things. But I was mostly there just to learn and see their work through their eyes. But having some of these conversation pieces was a nice way of just kind of keeping the chatting going. So I was mostly on my own. Here I am this is at Cliveden, but got to meet with a lot of great people. This is Nick Hayworth at the Garden House, which was one of my first gardens. While I was there, I ended up through an Instagram connection, got to get into one of the colleges at Oxford. And this is at Stourhead. This is Troy Scott Smith and Saffron Walden, who are at Sissinghurst. This is Tom Coward, who's the head garden at Gravetie, which was William Robinson's garden. This is Tom Brent at RHS Hyde Hall. And then a bunch of other people, including Fergus Garrett at Great Dixter. And what's that? And then some other people who I knew of through Instagram. This is Durslade Garden, which is Hauser and Worcester in Somerset, which you'll see a photo of. And then this was at Size and Coat, which is another garden that I learned a lot about on my journey. So these are the gardens in order, and incredible list. I went hoping to get to 45. And then just kept adding and adding. And some of them I learned about from my Airbnb manual. They talked about a local garden, so I wanted up a couple that way. Others I heard from people at some of the gardens I visited, and they told me about places to see. So it just kept growing, and I had the time to fit most of all these in, which was fantastic. And then these are the National Trust gardens that I went to in order from that previous list. I studied a little bit of landscape architecture when I was in school, and have read about gardens, and but it was incredible to see some of these classic gardens that represent some of these different landscape and gardening styles, from the typical English country house, which are often very, very rural. You're passing down these narrow British lanes for 15 miles, and then all of a sudden there's this huge grand estate that's hundreds if not thousands of acres with pastoral land and formal gardens and wall gardens and orchards, just really in unexpected places. Landscape gardens like Stourhead with the different follies. Stowe is another one that's a landscape garden. Sheffield Park is another. These pastoral gardens that are small little gardens with lots of pasture land, cows and sheep all around them. And then what I termed as moody gardens. And often it was because of the weather on the day that I was there. It was just overcast. But there was a moodiness to the statuary and just how the garden was laid out. It was very contemplative and very, I don't know, sometimes even on the edge of being a little depressing walking around them. But always, really, really interesting things to see. More modern estates like Castle Drogo, and then what I call gardeny gardens, like the Garden House. These are some of the first two gardens I visited. This is the Garden House and Wildside, which are just all about the plants and the layout of the garden itself. And then botanical gardens. This is the Oxford Botanical Garden, and this is RHS Rosemore, both in the southwest and up in Oxford. So here we go. Standout photo from each garden. And maybe I'll say a little something about each one. Maybe not. This was Wildside. The first one I went to, it was built by Keith and Roz Wiley. Keith was the first head gardener at the Garden House, which I'll show you in a second. Ross is an incredible painter. And if you saw some of the things that I put out for you to look at, there are some cards up there. And Ross was an incredible landscape painter, but unfortunately she passed away in 2016. So Keith is keeping this garden going on his own. This is Dartington Hall. Beatrix Ferrand, who did Dumbarton Oaks. This is the only garden that she did outside of the US. This is the Garden House. What's that? No, this is the only garden outside of the US and Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. She worked at Santa Barbara. This is Coteal, a National Trust garden. This is a 1,000-year-old English yew in the garden there. This is Castle Drogo, which I showed you a second ago. This was a Edward Luton's design garden, and he had done the palace in New Delhi, and so this is the only garden that I saw where the perennial border had a curved path taking you along instead of a straight path, which is very, very typical for a perennial border. RHS Rosemore, the first botanical garden that I went to, really incredible plantings. This is their summer garden, just incredible juxtaposition of colors and textures in just this one little tiny part of this huge botanical garden. Stourhead, known for its follies and for lots of films being done there, and this classic bridge that's kind of at one of the ends of the big lake that runs through the middle of the garden. This is Hauser and Worcester, which is a company that does boutiques and things like that, but this is their one garden. And this is the Pete Udoff garden that's featured in the Four Seasons that we watched the film last year. And he's designing this garden during that film. And so this is the fruition of that work. Really, really beautiful eupatorium that was 8 feet tall. Really incredible. This is Killerton, and this is from the bear hut that's there, and it has 4 different floor surfaces, including this one, which is all deer knuckles. Probably 10 feet in the diameter, one of the rooms in this little bear hut. But this is also where the Vici nursery, the Vici family developed a lot of plants, azaleas, lilacs, but the family who lived here sponsored the Vici nursery and were at the forefront of developing a lot of new plants. Yes. Okay. Well, that's not it's probably better at the bottom. All right. All right. Deer knuckles are the knuckles from the feet of, or the hoof, or maybe, I don't know actually which part of the deer's arm, but it's just, and I don't know if there's 4 knuckles in a deer or how many knuckles they have. I mean, we have many, but it was a piece of work. This is Nightshades, incredible wall garden at Nightshades, and yeah, a really beautiful garden. This is Dunster Castle on the south coast, and incredible views. And part of the garden actually reminded me very much of California. That coastal influence is a little bit of a warmer spot. This is Lights Carey Manor. This is one that I learned from Claire. This is where I discovered the slow plum that grows in the hedgerows that looks like a delicious little plum, and then you pop it in your mouth, and it's one of the most bitter things that you will ever eaten. But later on in the journey, I did actually make some sloe gin from the sloes in England. This is Tintin Hull. This was the garden of her last name was Rees, but a bunch of different garden designers lived at Tintin Hull. And this is one of the most magical moments I had while I was in England, was sitting on a bench, looking through these espaliered fruit trees with these perennials planted along the path. It was just a very tastefully done garden. This is East Lambrook Manor. Marjorie Fish was a garden writer, and this was her home. Really, really nice nursery. The garden needed some editing, but it had a few special moments. It was the first place that I saw a garden cat while I was there. Hestercombe, the Victorian garden was done by Gertrude Jekyll, and this wall with these perennials growing out of it was absolutely amazing. But the Victorian garden was enormous. I mean, 10 times as big as this room, and just parterres and stonework and really, really incredible design. This is the Newt, one of my favorite gardens. This had formerly been the garden owned by the Hobhouse family of Penelope Hobhouse, she was a very famous English designer. This is in the Parabola, which is a third of an acre and had 689 fruit trees growing in it. Most of them espaliered around the walls, inside and outside the wall. And this is another shot from the Newt. This is their dovecot. Oxford Botanic Garden, another really wonderful botanical garden. They talk a lot about the different authors who went to Oxford, including J.R.R. Tolkien and many others, and the places where they would sit and do their writing at the botanical garden. This is Rosham, one of those moody gardens. This is the same day, bright and beautiful, when I was at Botanic Garden, and then I got to Rosham and it was all cloudy and very, very moody, but a wonderful garden to wander and just sit and contemplate. Chaselton, this is the most magnificent Acer Gricium that I've ever seen, just perfectly proportioned. The house was decorated as though it was when the family died in the 60s, so old magazines, ashtrays, just tchotchkes around. It was a really fun garden house to visit. Upton House, the thing I remember most about this is this incredible bog garden that they had, which I'll show you a photo of in a bit. Just incredible array of plants in this small little bog garden. Packwood House, which is known for its yew topiaries, and they were in the midst of hedging them and renovating them. Really great to see all that care for these hundreds of year-old yew trees. Snow Hill Manor, it was an okay garden. This was kind of one of the best little moments. The man who owned it was kind of a crazy party planner, party maker. They have all kinds of wild things around, some of the little sheds and things that he had used in parties. But the garden was just okay. Coggs Manor was one that was in the manual at the Airbnb I was staying at. Part of Downton Abbey was filmed here, which I didn't know until I got there. It was kind of one of the family's staff houses. So they had pictures inside of some of the scenes that were filmed there. Waterpear Garden is a woman's horticulture college. Incredible garden. It was amazing being there mid-August to mid-September, how gardens that I saw at the beginning of August were already going dormant, and then others that I saw at at the beginning, when I first got there early mid-August, were already going dormant, and gardens that I saw toward the end of my time mid-September were still vibrant and looking really beautiful. So this is kind of midway, but these perennial borders and other borders that they had around the garden were just perfectly kept. Oops. This is Worcester College at Oxford. Simon Bagnall was the head gardener that took me around, and I just couldn't get over these lawns. They mow them twice in each direction, each time, to create this beautiful pattern. Also had an incredible perennial border. This is Sudeley Castle. I went there because they were known for their hedges, but a lot of English royal history. This was the old castle that came down in the 16th century. That's now just kind of a folly. Sorry, is just kind of a folly these days. This is Burton House, one that was part of our English garden trip in 2019 and looked so much better. The horticulture there was immaculate, just full of things in bloom. I complimented the staff. I just had to find someone to tell them what an amazing job that they were doing. This is Hidcote. This is day one staying there. I got to be there after all the staff left. I think it was the only person on the property. So I got to walk it at night. I went out and looked for hedgehogs after dark because I had a goal to see a hedgehog, which I never did. And then this is the next morning. So I was the first one there in the morning. This is 7 in the morning, walking around the garden and getting to see other parts of it. This is Sizencote, which the staff at Hidcote told me about. This was kind of an Indian palace meets a English garden. And I got to meet the head gardener just because I happened to ask him a question about one of the plants there. But really, really, really fun, unusual garden. This is Kifsgate, which is a lot of people's favorite. I wish I could have seen it in spring, but still just looking incredible. Just a little bit modern, a little bit, old-timey garden, incredible plantings, really, really well cared for. This is Stockhouse House. This is the only private garden that I visited, but it's part of the garden scheme, which I'll talk about it toward the end. But this marigold was one of my favorite parts of the garden while I visited. This is Gray's Court, beautiful pastoral lands around it, but also has a connection to Anne Boleyn and the royal family. This is Cliveden, and it was the first place where carpet bedding, and that is just planting beds out with one type of bedding plant, was ever done. It's now a hotel and enormous, enormous property. I don't know how many thousands of acres. Castle Ashby, incredible trees, incredible yew hedges. They had a little zoo in there with some strange African animals in it. That was unexpected. This is Stowe. This was Capability Brown's first garden that he designed, known for its follies. Another huge, huge garden. The house is now a school, but this is the Palladian Bridge, which was one of the favorite follies of mine. Hatfield House, and I love this purple dahlia in the beds. But they also had an arboretum that just kept leading me. It was kind of on the edge of the garden, and I started just, I wanted to check it out. And then it was so well done, and there was such an incredible diversity of trees that I just kept going and going and going, and ended up seeing the whole thing. This is Nebworth. This has a garden that herb garden that was designed by Gertrude Jekyll that didn't get planted until 75 years after she did the design. It wasn't until recently that they did it. But the castle here has all kinds of gargoyles and strange additions to it. I didn't tour the house, but and they also had trees that had fallen that they carved into weird animals, and it was another one of my not favorite gardens. Cambridge Botanic Garden, incredible exhibit on taxonomy and the plant families. And then it was also the first place where I saw a winter garden, where they had a garden devoted just to colors and textures of plants and early blooming things that are highlighted in winter months. This is Saffron Walden, which was a little town that someone had recommended I visit, and he raved about it. I didn't quite see the appeal, but it was a fun little diversion. This is RHS Hyde Hall, one of my favorite gardens. Really incredible. I'm saying incredible a lot. Really good interpretation. They had a really well done gardens, plants of the continent of the four continents of the earth. It was Asian, South American, European, and African plants in 4 quadrants around this gazebo, but also lots of other really well done plantings. This is Sandringham, one of the royal family's homes on the north coast in Norfolk. Beautiful trees, beautiful old English oaks and redwoods and giant sequoias on the property. The first place I saw drip tubing, and the only place I saw drip tubing at a garden in England. Oxborough, another one of my not so favorite gardens, but I love this little kitchen garden that they had. This is Ickworth House, which was very near where I was staying in Suffolk, and they had the biggest stumpery, which I'll talk about in a little bit, that I saw at any of the gardens that I visited. This is Beth Shadow's garden. It was a mecca garden for me, one that I really wanted to see. Unfortunately, it was a gray day, and it was kind of starting to fade a little bit, but this is her famous gravel garden, and I think it was the first time I saw a eucalyptus while I was in England. Hemmingham Hall had incredible really well done espalier fruit trees around their wall garden. The whole wall garden was interesting and had topiaries and it's quite beautiful. This is Felbrigg Hall. This was the next day. This day was very gray and I don't know, not one of my funnest days. Felbrigg was just a light. It was surprising, vibrant. This is, this is later in my trip, week 3, toward the end of week 3, and the vegetable garden is blooming. The cosmos are blooming. All kinds of perennials were blooming. Really uplifting garden. And then this is Blicking Hall, and this is the only garden where I have 2 photos, including, so this is an enormous yew hedge, hundreds of years old, and there's a place at the end of it where you can look down and see all the trunks of the yew hedge, and that was a really fun thing to see. East Ruston Old Vicarage, this was my favorite garden of the trip. A garden that wore me out. There was so much to see, so many new rooms coming along, impeccably done rooms, these creative pots, containers all around. I should have spent a whole day there instead of it being the 3rd garden of the day, but it was very, very much worth getting to. Oops. This was the day that I meant to take off. I wanted to have one day off, but I ended up going into town, into Bury St. Edmunds, and they had this wonderful little city park with an abbey. This is the Abbey Gardens, and this is just a typical park in England in summer, lush and beautiful, and very well kept and immaculate lawns. This is Wicken Hall, which dates back to. I have it later on in the show, but the current family, the wife is American, and they have really brought this beautiful cohesiveness to the garden through the color of the benches and the doors and the gates are either this terracotta red or a bright blue. And so it was wonderful just walking through and seeing all these points of color and how they use them throughout the garden. But they also had all kinds of California natives that were espaliered on the walls of the house, and a really surprisingly beautiful little garden. This is Chartwell, which was Winston Churchill's house. The Churchills bought this estate for £5,000 in 1920, invested another $15,000 in it, and it's remarkable. It's a really incredible estate. Sissinghurst, this is as I approached on my first day there. This is day 2, when I spent the day with Troy and Saffron. This is looking down from the castle at this incredible yew topiary hedge. And then my last night there, getting to see storm clouds coming in. This is Gravetime Manor. This was William Robinson's garden. William Robinson wrote the Wild Garden and the Flower Garden were 2 books that he wrote. There's a lot of history about him and his influence on gardens, late 19th, early 20th century. But their wall garden, the manor is now a hotel, and they get all their produce from their vegetable garden. Just very incredibly productive vegetable garden, and they were pulling stuff out and bringing it to the kitchen. This is Sheffield Park. Another landscape garden with lakes and trees and a few little follies here. Wakehurst, which is the sister campus to Kew Gardens, and this is where the Millennial Seed Bank is kept, but also a former estate and beautiful grounds. Great Dixter. I can't say enough about Great Dixter, and getting to spend the day with Fergus Garrett, just incredibly warm, generous man. But these gardens I find incredible inspiration from. Nyman's, now on my way to my last accommodation. This was an estate that burned, and they've kept it up and have enhanced it with these tropical plantings. But the family who owned this were also plant breeders, and there were there's a magnolia that I'm blanking on the name of that they developed. It's a beautiful hybrid magnolia that they have the oldest and the biggest tree in the world. This is Polesden Lacey, which had incredible gardens, an interesting manor house, but this is a sloping hill down to a kind of a ha-ha hedge and wall, and then looking out to the landscape beyond. It was, you could just, and they had all kinds of chairs and benches for you to sit on, and if I had the time, I could have spent all day there just looking out at this view. This is Modest Font, and it had really good interpretation about roses. They have an incredible rose garden with a lot of history and information about roses that I really enjoyed reading and learning from. They also had a stream going through the property with these giant trout that were just in there for you to see. It was almost like they were kept, but they were just hanging out in the stream. This is Hinton Apner, which these espaliered fruit trees just blew my mind. This is probably a 300-year-old pear tree, and it was incredible. West Dean is another horticultural school. Their dahlia garden at mid-September looked perfect. Not a speck of powdery mildew. Every plant was gorgeous. I don't know how they did it, but lots of greenhouses to tour and extensive grounds. Munstead Wood was the home of Gertrude Jekyll, being opened up. It's become a National Trust property recently, was in private hands for 60 years, and they're bringing it back and hoping to open it up. But through the connection of going to Sissinghurst, Troy Scott Smith set me up with their manager, Catherine Mills, and I got to tour around with her and see this garden with incredible history. And then my last day was at Wisley, RHS Wisley. This is their hedge trial. This is a trial that they're doing to try to find hedging plants to replace boxwood with the loss of boxwood to boxwood blight. And they've redone it since we were there in 2019 because they lost some plants in a cold winter. So this is still a work in progress. Okay. How are we doing? All right. We can do it. 15 minutes, 20 minutes. So some of the lessons that I learned while I was there. So first, habitat gardening. A real emphasis on things you can do in your garden to bring in animals, beneficial insects, butterflies, birds. And so some of the ways that you can do that are with a stumpery. So this is, again, the stumpery at Ickworth, with just taking old stumps, arranging them artfully, planting some ferns around them or something, and really drawing in all the plants and animals that love that kind of a habitat. Some other things, bee hotels. This was at Cliveden. Leaving dead plants in your garden for animals to forage from and create nesting material from. So there would be dead thistles and other plants left in beds, which was a real shock. This is at Wisley, just digging pits so that solitary bees and things can have nesting areas. This was at West Dean, kind of a glorified hotel with bricks and branches and pine cones and things. Another way of creating habitat in your garden. Piling up logs, this was kind of more formally done at Hyde Hall, but also kind of creating edges with logs so that you had places for hedgehogs and other animals to live. And then just piling up branches, sometimes more formally in what they call a dead hedge, but also informally like this. This was English laurel that they had piled up at Hestercombe. Meadows, I learned a lot about meadows and the keeping of meadows so that you promote the blooming of spring wildflowers. And so what they do at least once, if not twice a year, they cut back their meadows and rake up all the debris. They don't just leave it on the ground because that puts more nitrogen in the ground, which then promotes the growth of the grasses. So they will cut it and then rake it and then pile it up in other places or add it to the compost. They'll also move around seed heads as they're doing that so that they can get wildflower seeds in other places. And then sometimes they'll seed a plant called yellow rattle, which is semi-parasitic on grass plants. So it's all about suppressing the grasses enough so that they don't outcompete the wildflowers that you want to have come up in the spring. So these are some images of some of that work being done. This is Fergus Garrett, the CEO and head gardener at Great Dixter, with a string trimmer mowing the meadows at Great Dixter. This is, they're pulling out one of these trimmers that they use to just cut the grass. This is the big pile, one of the piles from at Great Dixter that they pile up and then plant squash in. And then here they are breaking up the grass at Sissinghurst, putting it in a truck, and then it'll go off to, I think they take it to a farm for animals to eat. And this is the meadow at Gravetie, which William Robinson wrote about meadows and the keeping of meadows early on in the early 20th century. Winter gardens, as I talked about a little bit about, having attractive bark, winter blooming plants, textural plants. And so these are some of the beautiful cherries that I saw in some of the winter gardens. This is Rubus cockburnianus, which is a white bloomed blackberry that adds beautiful color and texture. Hollies, roses, gray foliage plants, lots of hellebores, early spring blooming, early winter blooming bulbs. Something I'd never thought about having a winter garden. I guess probably coming from California, we don't have to worry so much about that. Climate change was unexpectedly not talked about too much in the gardens. This is, they had a little room at Killerton talking about climate change. The National Trust is kind of looking at a 30-year forecast for what their plants that are going to need to be replaced in 30 years, looking at what they need to adapt in terms of climate change. And then the Oxford Botanic Garden is looking a little bit more formally at what they can do with their future plantings. But there were definitely signs of disease. This is boxwood blight at Westine. And they were, for whatever reason, leaving these plants. Some of them were still alive, but you know, this is an example of what climate change is bringing us. They had donation produce stands at a lot of the National Trust gardens, which I thought was, in terms of Filoli and things that I could bring back to Filoli, I'm doing something like this. At our garden, I think would be a great way of engaging people. This was the only one that I bought a little bit of produce from. This was at Blicking Hall. Some of them were, you know, if I got there late in the day, there wouldn't be much left, but some of the gardens really put a lot of effort into these donation stands. And doing it by donation, you know, people are more likely to give a lot more than what they would pay in a grocery store. Some of the new, unexpected, and often used plants, completely inspiring uses of plants at gardens. Some of them were unexpected. And there were a lot of plants that I saw over and over again. And so these are some of the ones that I saw over and over again. The medlar, Persian mulberry, round leaf privet, one that we have at Filoli, Hebe glaucophylla, giant sequoias were at many, many gardens, lots of different California natives, Ceanothus, Garrya, Fremontodendron, redwood, Epilobium, and Carpentaria. Lots of orchards and lots of different things used as hedging material, just like Filoli. Some of the new plants that I saw and really appreciated, including quince trained as espaliers, this ginger, it's in my notes on the slide presentation, but I can't remember what the species is. This was a variegated plane tree, a sycamore. And then this is the nursery at Beth Chattow's garden, where they had 29 different varieties of Virginia in the nursery. I had no idea that there were that many varieties of Virginia. This is using oaks in containers. This is a low elderberry, Arabuus, I think. This is a acanthus, Senii and African acanthus. This hot chocolate, Hydrangea serrata, and then again that marigold that was at Stockcross House. California natives, beautiful giant sequoias at many, many, many gardens. This is one at Sandringham, which was planted by Princess Christiane of Denmark in November of 1863. And then other plants that I saw commonly, sometimes in regions. This is Eucryphia, which is a native to Australia and Chile. It's in its own plant family, but it was very common in the Southwest. This is Magnolia rusticana rubra that I saw at probably a dozen different gardens, which is one we have at Filoli. Lots of cyclamen heterofolium, Hebe glaucophila, golden catalpa, and then this Pittosporum Tom Thumb was at many, many gardens. Thank you. But the unequivocal winners were medlar, which I saw at probably 95% of the gardens. There are medlar trees, which we have them at Filoli. Probably no one else has them in their collection. A very, very uncommon fruit tree. And then Persian mulberries. And the reason Persian mulberry was planted in all these historic estates was that King Richard thought that the black mulberry was the one that the silkworms would eat, and then they could start a silk industry, but it's actually the white mulberry, not the black mulberry. But the fruit are delicious, and so they have lived on. Fruit trees, fruit collections, espalier fruit trees, everywhere I went, just a real emphasis, different types of espalier. This is the parabola garden at the Newt, an apricot, at Felbrigg, again at the Newt, just orchards, and this espaliered cedar at East Ruston, Old Vicarage. What's going on? More fruit trees, more training styles. Laurel lawns was another thing that I learned about, where English laurel was used instead of turf in kind of more wooded areas, including at Stourhead, where they had 30 acres of English laurel planted and trimmed each year as just a formal, look at us, we have this grand estate sort of a thing. But it was at least a half dozen different estates. Stowe, Blicking had laurel lawns. The National Trust has a real emphasis on creating play areas for families, different lawn games, croquet, lawn bowling, jousting, what you would see at each of the gardens, sometimes tucked into little pockets at the estate, sometimes right there as you entered, and I saw a fair number of families using them and playing with them. Silent spaces, which I thought was a really beautiful component of some of the gardens. Beth Chatto had it. Waterbury Garden had it, a couple others, where it was just a place where people could go and sit and reflect and be quiet. I think Waterbury, it said, please no children in the silent garden. Some of the interpretation I saw was really beautiful done. Sometimes it was on chalkboard, sometimes it was really detailed signage, but a lot of ways of learning about the garden, learning about the plants that I really appreciated. And then the history. Dunster Castle has a medieval gatehouse. Cote Hill dates back to 1600. Wicken Hall dates back 6,000 years. That was the one with the red bench under the oak tree. The Newt had an ancient Roman villa. Sissinghurst was a prison for French prisoners in the 1700s. Lots of gardens mention on their website that they are part of the Doomsday Book, which William the Conqueror had done, and it was completed in 1096. All these different gardens were around that long ago. The royal connections, gardens that had royal family members who were born there or lived there: Sandringham, Sudeley Castle, Gracecourt, Blicking, Cote Hill. And then they would mention, how many times Queen Elizabeth I visited there, or whomever in the royal family had been to the gardens over the centuries. I did learn a lot about how gardens scheduled their staff and other programs they had to keep the garden going. It was fun seeing little robotic mowers that I think 4 of the gardens, including Castle Drogo and Hidcote had, and they just run all the time, and then when their battery gets low, they park themselves at the charger, sit for a while, and they go back out. 24 hours a day they can be running, keeping their lawns mowed. At Stockhouse House, they had one, and the woman there, the owner, I asked about how she liked it, and she loved that there weren't just mowed patterns. She just liked the randomness of how the little robotic mower did its job. Unbelievable containers. I mean, I've been to dozens of public and private gardens. hundreds of public and private gardens in the United States. And what they do in England is just so much the next level. Mixes of things, olives in these modified Versailles boxes. I love, this was at Rosemore, just doing these giant containers of pelargoniums, all one variety. We do pelargoniums at Filoli, but not these single variety, really standout containers of pelargoniums. This was at Cliveden, this old Greek-inspired raised planter with succulents. But Great Dixter and what they do at the front of the house there is absolutely my favorite. They change it every week or two. It's a mix of containers from cedar trees to Sweet William, all sorts of different things that they combine in colors and textures. And so it's different every time you go. And some of the special moments while I was there, this is the bog garden. It's not a great shot of it, but this is the bog garden at Upton House. And I listed I just had to stand there and write down all the different names of the different plants that were in there. It was incredible diversity. This was a moment at Killerton where it was just different tree, different texture. I think what caught my eye was that there was a liquid amber tree here, but there's a southern magnolia, different Japanese maples, conifers, all in just kind of this line. And I don't know why it caught my eye, but it did. And then I just kind of studied the diversity of plants and found it really beautiful. I don't know. I think I think there's a lot of gopher holes actually, or some kind of molehills and patchy grass. Yeah, I think that's just how this projector is picking up I think it's just the brown dirt. Okay. Someone asked what's going on the ground there, and these are it's how the camera is reading the browns of the molehills. And again, this curved path at Castle Drogo, it was a special moment. That bench, this is at Felbrigg, and how I complimented the volunteers there because the garden impressed me so much. This is that moment at Tintin Hall, standing looking across the garden. This is the swimming pool at Kifsgate. It very much a sunset, sort of a sunset garden, sort of a moment, but this half round pool looking out over the land just drops off here, and then there's pastures down below. And this is way down below the house, and I just couldn't imagine living there and getting to spend time at that pool. And then this was at Gray's Court, and this was a sculpted gardener, and this was a poem that was etched on the backside of this sculpture. And I'm not going to read it for you, but it was it was hard to read because it was in the round around this log. So I looked it up when I got home, and I wanted to record it here. And then I think the last special moment was having Fergus Garrett tell me how they get the work done at Great Dixter. And so he grabbed my notebook and did this little drawing of months of the year and all the things that they have to get done and how it all relates to each other. That was fantastic. And then this is the English enjoying their gardens. And you would see families, they would come for the day and they would tour the formal garden, and then they would tour the house, and then they would walk the miles of trails on the estate, and then they would go to the gift shop and the cafeteria there and really make a day of it. And this was at Nebworth, and these folks just had set up this picnic on the lawn. They were there the whole time. It was one of the hottest days that I was in England. It was probably 90 degrees, and they were there from when I got there to when I left, just hanging out and just enjoying this view. And it's something that I think here in the States we don't do enough of. We don't spend a whole day at a garden regularly and just appreciate it and enjoy the beauty and talk about the plants and talk about the history. I think it's something we need to do more of. These are the different types of different garden access there when you're in England. So this is the Royal Horticultural Society. There's the 5 botanical gardens, and then they have dozens of affiliate gardens. This is a $100 membership for the year. Royal Oak is $80 and gets you access to 500 gardens for free. I probably saved $2,000 on admission fees just for having this Royal Oak pass. And then the National Garden Scheme was that private garden that I went to, Stockcross House. And there are over 3,500 private gardens in this network, and they have open days. Sometimes it's regular, sometimes it's twice a year. They have a big catalog, and you could see a garden, every single day. So, bottom 5. Lights, Carey Manor, oh, I don't have Oxborough in here. Just these are some of the ones. They all had, really interesting things about them, good history, but maybe it was my mood, maybe it was just the garden was kind of starting to fade at the end of the season. These were some of the ones that weren't so much my favorites. And these are my top 10, sort of in order: East Ruston Old Vicarage, the Newt. Part of the reason why I love the Newt so much was that they talk about there being 125 membership that you have to have in order to get in there. But I told them my story about just touring gardens, being from the States, and they gave me a day pass, and I was just thrilled to be able to get to see it. But it really delivered. Felbrigg Hall with its great wall garden, Hyde Hall, Burton House, Tintin Hall, Westdean, Waterperry, and then Sissinghurst and Stourhead. And then wrapping up some of my tour packages in the Southwest, I would see Rosemore, Stourhead, the Newt, Tintin Hull, and Nightshays. In the Oxford area, Burton House, Hidcote, Upton House, Kiffsgate, and Waterperry Garden. That's that women's horticultural college. In Suffolk, Norfolk, northeast of London, East Ruston, Felbrigg, Hyde Hall, Cambridge Botanic Garden, and Beth Chatto's Garden. In Kent and Sussex, Great Dixter, Sissinghurst, Gravetye, Nyman's, and Chartwell. In Surrey and the vicinity, Wisley, Westdean, Modestfont Abbey, Poleston Lacey, that's that one with that incredible view down the lawn, and then Hinton Appner with those old fruit trees. Some of my regrets, gardens that I wish I had seen, were Iford Manor. Just couldn't squeeze it in. Waddesdon Manor I tried to get into, but it was sold out. Prospect Cottage, which was the garden of Derek Jarman. And I got confused because you had to have a ticket to see the house, but I could have gone to the garden. It's not far from Great Dixter. And then I do regret not going to Kew. I went to Kew the last time I was there, and it wasn't one of my favorites on that trip, but I probably should have gone. I missed not going during flower show season. I wish I had spent more time at East Ruston and Wisley. I think some of the gardens that I visited that I didn't have as great a time, Beth Chatto, Stowe, Rosham, were because of the gray days, but so I should have given them more credit. I wish I'd spent more time just enjoying England, but I was terrified of driving with any alcohol in my system, so I didn't stop at many pubs along the way. But I think toward the end, I was doing more pubs as I got more comfortable driving. I think I would do more, and then not seeing a hedgehog. But then there were some fun, unexpected moments. There was, when I was in Suffolk, there were plum trees in the garden, plum trees in the hedgerows, and that's where I made sloe gin from sloe berries that I picked. I made a plum cheese and used an old jam jar to make that, which I took to Italy, which Joe and I did after this trip. Some of the local cheeses. This was a basket of produce that they gave me at Sissinghurst when I arrived. So really great moments. But I have to say, one of the best gardens in the world, still in my mind, is Filoli. Thank you. Any questions? I put in the regrets because I figured someone would ask about regrets that I had. I will repeat questions, yes. I'm putting up the list of the best gardens. There we go. Yes. Yeah, the question was how I organized my hubs in the gardens that I saw, and it was based on when Troy Scott Smith at Sissinghurst was going to be available. He changed his dates, but I wanted to go kind of in a circular pattern, and so I was going to start with him and then go the reverse, but then there was something else that worked out that I needed to go from the southwest, north, east, but then back down to the south. In the back. The question was, how did I decide which month I went? And it was based on conflicts at work. I would have rather have gone in the spring, but there was just too much going on. I wanted to do it last year. There were some other things going on. I got married. So there were some conflicts that made mid-August to mid-September the best time to go. Mary Beth. The question was, did I see many people in the gardens? And I did. And I did actually learn when we went to England, and no, someone in the last few years has told me sometimes gardens are better photographed with people in them to give them context and scale. And I did take, but I didn't take that. There were just so many incredible plants that I just could not focus on anything else. So I ended up just taking mostly pictures of plants. Another question? What is my one takeaway that I want to incorporate into Filoli? There's a couple. The first is that one of the first gardens I went to, which was the garden house, it was the first place that I learned about volunteer programs that are small volunteer programs. And Filoli has changed its volunteer program, and this garden had 14 volunteers, and they worked full days once a week. And when they were recruited, they were told all they're going to do is weed, but they end up doing other things. So for me, it was I do in a lot of ways want to bring back a regular volunteer program at Filoli, and I thought that this would be a good way of doing that. The other thing was the vegetable stand that I saw, and doing that, having that at Filoli, I think would be great. A great way to use our produce, talk about our produce, show people day to day that we are using it, and giving it to access to the guests. Way there in the back, Lisa. The question was, do I think that England is ahead of us in doing more to promote habitat and bringing animals in the garden? And I do, absolutely, yeah. I think here we're afraid, in more suburban areas, you have rats and you have things that you don't want in your garden, and sometimes those sorts of stumps and piles of logs and letting plants die can promote some of the bad things, but you need to think about the insects and how the beneficial insects and the bees and things like that, flies and beetles that are beneficial to your garden, can help your garden to be resilient and fight off pests. And so I definitely want to incorporate more of those sorts of things at Filoli. John. The question is what they do during the winter, as opposed to us. They go through garden seed catalogs. They start potting up in the winter and getting things ready for when it warms up. I I would appreciate having a little bit of more downtime to do planning and catch up and things like that. It's busy every day at Filoli, and I would like a little bit of that winter downtime. Yeah. The question is that don't most of the gardens there have greenhouses and have work to do? Not most of them. Yeah, some of them do. Some of the bigger estates do, and they're using them, but uh, some of them don't. But they're, like us, they're out pruning in the winter. There is cleanup to do in the winter, so there still is work to be done. The back. The question was what the state of Filoli's volunteer program is as opposed to the 14. We do a program called Service Learning, where each month we have 3 days of a project-focused volunteer program where they work in the orchard or they work mulching or things like that. So it's a much abbreviated program, and there's except for we do have a partnership with Kusamura Bonsai Club, and they tend to our bonsai and are there every week. But it's mostly just, it's 70 people, 3 days during 1 week of the month, as opposed to a little bit more spaced out and more routine. So bigger, but not as consistent. In the back. Did I think about going to a place that was rewild? There was one garden that in Hampshire, I think, that I wanted to go to, but there was some conflict and I didn't get to go in. I didn't make it there. But I think through some of this habitat work that they're doing at gardens, and there were some renovation projects going on, there was a little bit of that, but it would have been nice to see something more formally being done. What are we doing? Well, I'll take one more question. Mary Beth. The question was how we translate gardening in a drier climate as opposed to what they can do in England. And you choose different plants. You know, a lot of what makes those gardens specials is the density of the plantings, the different textures, the different colors of plants. Beth Chatto said, you always want to look at what your plants look like when they're not in bloom. That's the most important thing. And then the blooms are a bonus. And so doing things like that to bring year-round color, but with drought-tolerant plants is a win-win. All right. Thank you all.